Hi, welcome back to this afternoon session of Field Meeting, and so wonderful that all of you came back immediately after lunch. And what a wonderful session, wasn't it, to wake up after your sort of heavy lunch for some of us. While we're waiting for the other two artists, just a kind of re-registering that the session that we called just now was 1984 in Disguise, the project of resistance. Incidentally, what Lisa was referring to was this document in your sort of book that sort of describes the various sessions. Okay, Abdullah is here. Hi, okay, once again, we're waiting. My name is Boon. I'm the director of the Asia Society Museum. I'm here with Bansie. Bansie will co-moderate this panel with me, with the wonderful presenters that we sort of have this afternoon. And it's interesting going through the presentations that how much the whole session was, in a sense, about silence, about what is unsaid, about the attempts to say what is unsaid, and the attempts by various factors to let the unsaid be unsaid. Whether it is about the larger historical narratives or political or social contexts that sort of impinge upon an artist's work, or the fact that what is unsaid is the artist's work, is the source of concern. So that is a kind of very paradoxical, I suppose, situation. As Weiyi's sort of title of his project, the speechless speech, those that are speechless but yet they are able to communicate something to us despite the silence or the attempts at silencing. So first I would like to, we'll try and leave some time for question and answer. I realize there's a lot of burning questions buzzing in the audience, but first a kind of general question to the panelists about, working in Asia, and I personally have been the subject of, or the implementer of various forms of silencing at various points, and those of us that organize exhibitions in Asia, in particular sort of regimes, it's just a kind of daily fact of life. I would like to ask the panelists, of course, the curator and the artists involved, this issue of, at one end it literally becomes censorship, but at the other end there are all sorts of rules and guidelines, and some of them may not be unspoken, about what cannot be said, what cannot be expressed in art and in projects of art, what cannot be said in public. I mean, how much is that, and where does that sort of drive you as an artist, or as a maker of exhibitions? Let's be very Asian and go one end. We? Yeah, no longer silent.
You're next.
Give him a break, Nadia. You start first.
I'm so sorry. I go to deliver the wheelchair, so I don't know. I missed the question.
Okay, it was a general question to everybody to start. As to whether the session had a lot to do with what is silent, what cannot be said, both as a kind of situation in which artists find themselves today, particularly those of us that live in certain kinds of social conditions, but also as a kind of subject, the fact that what you cannot say a lot of things becomes the subject of art making. So it was a general question about, as artists and exhibition makers, how much is this, or what are the instances in which this is important for you? This idea of what cannot be said.
I think what cannot be said because my English is very bad. So I like to say something about my work, but I think I'm very bad at speech. So and then I think maybe I can do something special. Maybe the silence, maybe it's better. So this idea is come from one of my work. It's 2015, and this work is showing Wuren's Art Center, and it is it's kind of this same idea. It's I doing a lot of words sculpture and in the handbag, and because in China, you know, there's a lot of people, so and in the rush hour or in the New Year's and people going back to their hometown, so there's a lot of handbags live on the train station. So I just make a lot of handbag in the exhibition, and each handbag there's a word sculpture inside, and the camera keep capturing them. And then I start maybe, I don't want to say anything, I just want to make this and let the program randomly and to make some point, make some opinion, make some sentence, yes.
It's like situational, that
yes,
your interest is to create situations that sort of expose these sort of, you know, things that are there, but we never really sort of, sometimes you don't want to talk about it, but it's there.
Yeah, I think maybe the audience maybe can think about that. I don't want to talk this something very obviously, very clear, you know. No, sometimes artists, they don't want to talk too much. They want audience to think about that. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Can we quickly move on to Nadiah?
Thank you. I think I've always been interested in how things become unsaid, the mechanisms of power that manage to coerce an entire community or an entire art community, an entire neighborhood, district, to not speak about something in particular without exerting overt forms of control. So that kind of subliminal coercion. And that is in itself a spectacular phenomena, which I think deserves artistic introspection, I suppose is the word. Yeah.
And of course, Southeast Asian society and Indonesian society is I would say, sometimes quite exceptional in the amount of unwritten sort of codes that exist, that guide sort of society or social relations.
And the process of keep maintaining those codes, the socialization of each other from childhood into school, into adulthood, of continuously maintaining those codes of silence. That's on particular subjects. And then, of course, when those particular subjects come up, there's a media explosion and demonstrations and blah, 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 and then it quiets down again. Yeah.
So you live, it's sort of like there are, it's sort of like there are long periods between eruptions of when the silence gets broken, and then, you know,
Yeah, the volcano in Jogjakarta is a good metaphor.
A good metaphor, yeah. All the Indonesian artists speak of the volcano as a metaphor. Abdullah?
I suppose in a lot of my work, I've come at this almost from a more procedural angle, as you know, working at an art institution in a context where there is a very clear system for deciding what can and cannot be said. It becomes about how to work with artists to manifest that, and every instance is different. And I was originally intending to give a talk that was more like a catalog of different examples of how we'd done that over the years, and then I realized they were actually all quite different on the surface, but actually quite similar. I mean, in terms of the institutional response, just in the sense of how one attempts to make the unsaid visible.
There's also a question I want to ask, and it actually came up when speaking to Abdullah yesterday, 2 days ago, when he described his practice as poetic activism. And I'd like to, and I hope you can answer this, and I'd like to ask the other artists, the other participants also to speak about their work in terms of activism or in terms of intervention as a practice.
I didn't mean to avoid the question, but I think it was about silence. So I thought that by keeping myself silent, I would answer it. So I'm going to wrap those questions in one answer. The way that I describe, or not describe, I'm thinking about my art practice now, it's more so about what I describe in Urdu language as mazmum muzahimat, which somewhat translate into poetic activism. And you know that in poetry, the poetry itself is being used for activism. I feel that what I'm doing and what I have done, I feel, especially in performance art, the intervals or the silence moment, for example, John Cage, famous silence piece, or other artists as well. I feel that those are the ones who absolutely activates what some of the artwork are unable to do, which is vulnerabilities in us. And I feel that I'm actually trying through my work at this point to show my vulnerabilities, talk about them, and then connect with your vulnerabilities. And I feel that if I can do that, then I believe that the silence that was there, that has been unsaid, doesn't need to be said, because it needs to be felt. It needs to come out in that sort of an expression. And I believe a lot of artists from our region, especially from South Asia and others, where you actually mentioned that there are a lot of things that remain unsaid because there is a social code or cultural code. I think that is something that is happening now more so than ever, that writers are actually now looking into those things and saying, what are the things that have been unsaid and why? Not everything needs to be overt, not everything needs to be described, not everything has to be written about, because you have to experience the art at the end of the day. It's a visual thing, it's an experiential thing, and at the end of the day, it's about you, what you take with you. And I think that's what poetic activism to me is about.
What was the question?
The question is that he describes his work as poetic activism, and perhaps you could talk about the idea of intervention or how you see your work in terms of, I know you said you couldn't show this work in Jogjakarta, it has to be seen outside, so I'm just wondering if you could talk about the kind of effect you expect your work to have.
I would definitely, this is about as far as I've gone in terms of making a critique of a particular state of power where I've lived, and most of the critiques that I've made in my career have been in Indonesia. And this is about as close as I've got to kind of poking at the balloon, if you like. And I think I would be able to show this work in Jogjakarta, but in private spaces. But what I felt was, I kind of agreed with Boon when you talked during the Uli Sig documentary, that art provides more of a place, a space, in which the unsaid can be said, because we have such a low audience level, so to speak. Yeah, is that intervention? I try my best to kind of dig at the heart of what controls us the most. And I think I managed to achieve that for myself in my work, in my relationship with my work personally. Whether or not I can communicate that to the audience is another issue, but I try my best, at least, yeah.
So you are talking about silence? Silence again? About
Talking about your work as activism.
Unsaid. Because it's kind of I do this work is because I don't want to say something. So I want to make a situation and to say what's the possibility of the words, and I want to let the audience to experience and work into the situation and find the meaning. Yes, that's what I want to do. Yes.
I feel the interesting thing about your work is that the strategy that you use seem to be about creating a potential for various possibilities in the audience, rather than, in a sense, a kind of subject-object strategy. I mean, it seems to be you create a kind of situation where the audience that receives the work has a kind of, there's a kind of possibility, and it's still, in a sense, to me personally, is still a very classical artistic strategy, that one of the things that artists do is to expand the realm of possibility, that we are in a moment where the realm, that possible horizon keeps closing. Everybody, whether it's overt censorship, it's persecution, or it's something that is unsaid, or it's what we expect from art, like we expect A, B, C from art. And I think, along that range, there are various sort of, I'm sorry to be using the same word again, possibilities. I think I'm running out of time. I should throw to the audience now, right? How much time? Okay, that's not a lot of time. Can I invite questions from the audience?
I think we should
There's one there. Is it Miwako? And then after that, the gentleman behind.
Actually, could we also talk about the use of the body? The body becomes a very important vehicle here to talk about the unsaid. And I'm wondering if you could say something, Abdullah, about how you came up with this notion of using the body to say the unsaid.
I think body provides the most immediate means to express anything. Dance, for example, or prayer. We do that every day in some regards. In some regards, body is the most immediate means for you to express. And I feel that I encountered performances basically when I moved to Australia, because in Australian culture, the ideas of body and expressing through body is actually very ingrained. And I find it very interesting that they could express very complex ideas through body and movement. But what I also find that our everyday activities that we do, for example, eating, looking, seeing, talking, and just moving, I think if you would just look closely, there are indicators, the indicators of that silence that you're talking about, that how the silence can be made unsaid. What is unsaid can be said. And I think that's where the body language comes in play. And I think as an artist, I try to master that body language to communicate with very minimally, as much as possible, to express certain ideas in terms of what I'm talking about. And as I said, I don't want to describe my work or explain to an extent where the performance or the body becomes completely unrendered. I want to keep it as intact as possible, as veiled as possible, as we said in in Islamic discourse, as veiled as possible, because you don't remove all the veils. If you really want to interact with body, if you really want to see that body in that context, then you need to reveal it slowly. you just can't just go in and then reveal the body or what is expressing it. So I think the body is becoming increasingly important in my work, and as well as I think in South Asian art, especially in the past 5 years, and numerous artists, I can speak only for Pakistan at this point, I think the numerous artists actually now are using the performance art as a medium to express all those ideas that remain unsaid, because that's a very, very direct way to express certain ideas.
I think that's true throughout Asia at
Yes,
particular moments,
absolutely.
and certainly of China.
Yeah. And you talk about the
Southeast Asia.
possibility, and I think that's where the possibility lies for them, the body, and its immediacy. And that's I think you will see that a lot coming from that region itself.
I think we should go to the audience before we run out of time. Sorry, is it Miwako first and then the gentleman behind? I'm sorry, I can't see you. The light is too bright. Is it? Yeah. Is there a mic, please? Where's the mic gone? Yeah.
Hi, Miwako again here from Reversible Destiny Foundation. This is a question to Hu Weiyi, who is now busy taking pictures, which kind of relates to my question. I'm here. Yeah. So I'm seeing, it's really interesting seeing you digitally taking pictures from the stage with your smartphone, and it's really an indication of your generation. Of course, you will take digital pictures because that is part of your, perceiving, manner of perception of what's happening around you. So, to artists who's of your generation, first of all, what I saw in your work was the strong presence of surveillance, this God's eye that is looking at every part of human life, including your bare body. So for an artist from the generation where digital media and technology are a native language, how do you feel the existence of surveillance, and is it even a target of resistance for you? It's just personal opinion or comments would be appreciated.
Sorry, I'm trying to explain in Mandarin. We will try and translate.
Maybe I speak Chinese. Maybe it's better. No. 他说到那个各种监控的仪器，我觉得对，这是现代社会的一个很大的一个特征，然后也是我为什么选择用这个摄像机的其中一个原因。
Okay, yeah. So he agrees that all these instruments of surveillance is a reality in contemporary society, which is why he chose the particular sort of mode that he did.
然后我还关注到，就是因为还有一点，我觉得对我来讲很感兴趣，就是关于随机性。因为我觉得现代社会它不光是我们被很多东西给监控，而是我们接受信息的方式已经改变了。因为社交网络的出现，我们接受信息更多的是一种随机的接受信息，而不是一个线性的一种方式去接受信息。
So also I think in short, it's talking about how even though there are many sort of instruments of surveillance, but like with social media and so on, there's a lot of choice and a lot of variability. You could respond in certain ways. It's not a kind of linear way of operating anymore.
所以其实我更多的想，其实就这些文字在那随机组合，其实就有点像平时我们在翻什么 Facebook、Instagram 之类的，你永远不知道下面的会出现什么东西。然后，但是我们已经习惯了以这样的方式去接受信息，都是非常快的，然后一下子就跳出来另外一个东西。
So that was very interesting, the work that he did just now. You know, the sort of cascade of words, you know, the sort of, in a sense, when you see one word in the work just now, one image, you can't really anticipate what is the next one. So it's sort of, he describes it almost as if, you know, on the internet, on the Facebook, for example, you are sort of browsing through the entries, or the news feed rather.
所以我就觉得，可能我们看艺术的方式也要随着这个而变化，就不是那种在那边去思考，像你看一张古典油画的一种方式，可能是这种方式更贴切我们的现代生活。
So he was aiming for, you know, this idea that the way that we approach art would be quite different from, you know, when we look at pre-modern art, when, for example, we would contemplate, you know, a classical painting, that now this form of almost impressionistic and a kind of cascade within a kind of variable sort of environment is a more kind of closer to how we experience and we sort of extract information right now.
That's it. Yeah.
Which is interesting. Yeah. Okay, good. There was a question behind. I'm sorry. Could you identify yourself? We can't see you at all. Sorry.
I'm Bob Lee with the Asian American Art Center. The Tao cannot be spoken. However, in this context, we're talking about power. And not only power, the political power of suppression, but we're also talking about the dominance of language. So you want to counteract that with some potential, with silence. And so the dominance of rational language, which we have here, so well articulated, everything, it's refreshing to hear someone who doesn't want to speak. And it's also refreshing to hear that by consuming flowers, you can express your vulnerabilities. The vulnerability of saying something, which, so anyway, there seems to be some potential here. Not only that, the political suppression that we're trying to deal with, but also a way of countering that kind of political oppression with a kind of tacit mode of a tacit agreement of silence that can undermine political or social authority. I think that this has a great deal of potential, I'm sorry to use that word, that is revealed by what has just happened at the Guggenheim and in the context of all that you've said and what has apparently been there since 1950 in Jakarta. I don't know what question I'm asking, but perhaps you can address it.
I think it's interesting that you talked about politics and power. And I think if you look at the contemporary art history, I think artists have grappled with that idea. And I think everything right now, for example, I'm from South Asia. And one of those things that we talked about is that the politics it runs like blood in our body because you can't escape from it. You have to live with it every day. But how can you counter that? How can you set aside and get on with your life? And for an artist, it's very difficult to do that. So the strategies are that you become overt, you go out and you become an activist and you have placards and then you try to change things. But more so happen is that those people end up in jail or persecuted and whatever. And then when they get out, the time has passed and they become kind of moralized in that sort of a thing. because the history is only made or being written when that time is particularly past, and then the history is written. But I feel that there are other artists as well who are using this counter strategy of silence, and I actually I feel that the politicians are so ingrained in their own greed and in their own power that they're unable to understand or experience nuances that silence can offer. So when you talk about silence, they actually look at it and they don't understand it. And that's how you can get by with in terms of that. But if you, anytime when you raise your voice, they can understand that because that's what they want to suppress. So I feel that the potential of silence is right there to use. And I think artists have been doing that for a while now. So yes, it has a tremendous potential, and that's what I talked about, this poetic activism, that artists are now doing that sort of an activism, because I'm not outside, I'm not putting myself in risk, and when I'm being called as an activist, I actually need to stop because I'm not an activist. And I stay in my studio, I work in a very comfortable environment, but and that's true, it's that, but at the same time, I actually put myself and my body in certain situation, even for temporary, to experience that, and then from that experience, I draw something from it, and that I share with the audience, and that's where the vulnerability comes in play.
So, at the back. A good Q&A usually means the person holding the mic goes back and forth. Question, please. We're running out of time. Okay.
I actually want to say kind
Hold
of the
that question.
opposite of what you said. Yeah. I'm just worried that situations where there is so much lack of democracy actually contributes to a totally depoliticized art community. And that's, I think, what Lisa was yelling out just now. Say what should be, what is unsaid. And I'm experiencing that where I live at the moment. And yes, despite the fact that silence can contribute to a kind of political force, silence can contribute to itself. It can contribute to the numbing of an entire community, depoliticizing an entire community, depoliticizing entire genres of work into nothingness, into political nothingness.
So silence is subservient only if it's understood, right? Silence is subservient only if it's understood as a vehicle of communication, and what you're saying is in a depoliticized environment, if nobody understands it, it kind of, it's a...
But I think these strategies that we talked about, I think they are parallels. There are two strategies. I'm not saying that one overrides the other. There are two strategies. And I think when it comes to political art, the strategies that is head-on is being more questioned and talked about it. And here I think the question about narratives comes in play, the silence that you're talking about, that for example, in Pakistan, the discussion is happening that we must write our narratives before someone else will come in and write that narrative. And once that narrative has been written by someone else, then we are basically following that narrative. So I think that silence is making people realize that what are the strategies they can use to counter that, these problems.
Philip, would you like to contribute to that?
Behind this one.
Just a very quick realignment. I think the conversation we have been having so far is about the speaker. But in order for communication to happen, there has to be a listener. And I think the threat we are facing now is the crowds and their power, and the power that crowds hold, as demonstrated by the Guggenheim incident. Yeah. So my basic question is, how do you activate a passive crowd, a crowd that sits there and watches you eat without intervention, that allows you to do things to yourself without stopping you, and your gestures, even if they might be performing self-harm. How do you deal with a crowd like that? A passive crowd, a crowd that refuses to speak up in Jogjakarta, in China, in Singapore.
Yeah. But let's
China.
ask the...
Okay, that's my question.
Let's get a range of views. So Philip's not going to escape, so let's ask the exhibition
I think
organizer.
that was almost the question as answer. That was a really beautiful way of putting it. And I think that one of the most difficult things about this whole period was well, the extent to which the actual work was not considered, right? That or how easy it was for people to write it off completely without having seen it, or to issue kinds of statements about, you know, what should and should not be possible. Essentially, an attempt to kind of legislate certain moral norms that should be universally applicable. That was, I mean, quite scary to see kind of in action, and also, of course, based on imperfect information, the fast potentials for organization brought on by social media and other things, and a basic lack of patience or willing to sort of encounter something approaching its own terms.
Other artists like to comment?
I don't think I want to activate a crowd in Jogjakarta, personally. I want to be able to speak about the things that I think about. And I found this the opportunity to do so. But I'm afraid to activate the crowd in Jogjakarta. It's as simple as that. I live there with my family, with my son. There are issues of safety at stake. It's a very important question. I hadn't even considered it until you said it.
Is that the Oscar music, Lisa? Okay. We'll have break, and of course there's many sort of burning questions to ask, but please, thank you all for coming. There's a short break now. Lisa will make the announcement, but I just wanted to say a lot of these issues are also covered in the exhibition that's upstairs on the second floor. After darkness, during the break, you can go and flash your nice name tag and go in as well. So thank you all.